Welcome to our channel, a place where everyday stories are told in the most extraordinary way, deep, dramatic, and full of inspiration. Each video is a slice of life, a lesson that lingers after a smile or a thoughtful shake of the head. If you love stories with depth and meaningful life lessons hidden behind the smallest moments, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss a single journey with us. Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, our companion on this journey of discovering the simple yet meaningful things in life. Snow had fallen heavily throughout the night, and by morning, Eli Turner woke up with a clear plan: shovel his driveway before the rising sun turned the powder into a sheet of ice. As a meticulous and organized engineer, Eli never misplaced his tools, especially not something as essential as the brand new snow shovel he had just purchased the week before. It was a heavy-duty model with a steel blade and a non-slip handle, built to withstand the brutal Oregon winter. But when he stepped into his garage, he froze. The shovel was gone, completely vanished. His eyes scanned every familiar corner, behind the tool rack, under the shelves, even in the old shed out back. Nothing. Slightly confused, Eli stepped outside, the fresh snow crunching under his boots. And then he saw her, Karen, the woman who lived next door and had long reigned as the president of the Seabreeze Hollow HOA. Dressed in a luxurious winter coat and spotless white boots that had clearly never touched mud, Karen was out there shoveling her driveway, with his shovel. The familiar handle, the chipped paint along the blade. There was no mistaking it. Eli approached her calmly. "Good morning, Karen. That shovel looks familiar." She looked up, unfazed, as if he had just interrupted her from curing world hunger. "Oh, this? You gave it to me last week, remember?" Eli almost laughed. "I just bought that shovel, Karen. My initials are on the handle." Without even glancing down, she replied flatly, "Must be a coincidence," then turned her back and kept shoveling, leaving Eli speechless in the snow. It wasn't the first time Karen had been unreasonable, but this crossed every line. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a dictator, cloaked in a festive scarf, running the neighborhood with an iron clipboard and a fine for every imagined offense. From lawn height to Christmas light deadlines, nothing escaped her tyrannical reach. And now she had outright taken something that belonged to Eli, lied about it, and brushed him off like it didn't matter. Eli knew that if he let this go, she would only push the boundaries further. This wasn't just about a stolen shovel anymore. It was the spark that would ignite a winter war. And Karen, with her smug smile and perfectly polished exterior, had no idea she'd just declared it. Karen wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was the embodiment of unchecked power in a community that only appeared peaceful on the surface. As the president of the Seabreeze Hollow HOA, for 7 consecutive years, she ruled the neighborhood like a frostbitten queen in her winter fortress. With a clipboard clutched like a royal scepter and a scrutinizing gaze that missed no detail, she turned community regulations into weapons, punishing anyone who didn't meet the standards she personally defined. One lawn gnome, that's a $50 fine. Grass over 2 inches tall, another $50. Christmas lights still up after January 2nd. Expect a warning letter and a threat to be summoned to the HOA board. Actions that were harmless, personal, or even culturally meaningful fell squarely under Karen's jurisdiction, and she never needed consensus. Most of the HOA board were either her friends or too intimidated to push back. So when Eli Turner, a quiet, law-abiding resident who preferred to stay under the radar, stood up at an HOA meeting to question Karen about the stolen shovel, every eye turned toward him. He came armed with a receipt and a photo of the shovel sitting in his garage just a week prior, thinking logic and proof would speak for themselves. But Karen wouldn't allow that. Before anyone else could respond, she offered a sweet but chilling smile and said, "We take accusations very seriously here, but falsely accusing someone of theft is a direct violation of HOA Rule 3.2b. And just like that, Eli was slapped with a $75 fine for threatening behavior during a neighborhood dispute. A ridiculous excuse, but enough to silence his protest. 2 days later, he received another citation. Failure to remove snow within HOA time requirements. Fine, $50. The bitter irony? Karen still had his shovel. She hadn't just taken his property, she twisted reality and the rules themselves to punish the victim like it was all part of some cruel inside joke. No one dared speak up. Many had already fallen victim to her tactics. Karen knew the neighborhood's weakness, people's exhaustion, their desire for peace, and she exploited it to cement her power. But what she didn't realize was that Eli Turner wasn't going to stay silent forever. That moment shifted everything. He no longer saw her as just an overbearing neighbor. She had become something else entirely, a petty tyrant who needed to be brought down. And he was going to do it in a way she'd never see coming. Eli Turner wasn't the kind of man who got angry easily. But after being publicly humiliated at the HOA meeting, fined for an offense he didn't commit, and turned into a neighborhood meme on Facebook, his patience finally reached its limit. The photos spread like wildfire. Karen, smugly holding the stolen shovel like a trophy, with the caption, "Finders Keepers," splashed across the screen. One resident even created a bingo card titled, "Things Karen Can Fine You For," and right in the center square was Eli's name. But Eli didn't retaliate with rage. He didn't post a furious rebuttal, argue with neighbors, or raise his voice in frustration. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at a half-finished cup of cold coffee, and began sketching plans. In the mind of an engineer like Eli, revenge didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be precise, silent, and cold. Having spent years working on extreme climate projects in Alaska and Canada, Eli knew how to manipulate water and ice within the laws of nature. Now, that knowledge became his greatest weapon. He didn't need Karen to confess. He didn't need anyone to believe him. He just needed Karen to feel the consequences of crossing a line without accountability. On the first night, he tested a simple misting system using a garden hose and reserve water tanks, quietly activated under Oregon's sub-zero temperatures. The next morning, the fence along Karen's yard shimmered with a thin layer of ice, just enough to raise an eyebrow. Karen noticed. She muttered something as she tapped the frozen branches with a stick, but she didn't suspect a thing. Eli pressed on, adjusting angles, swapping out nozzles, adding timers and thermal sensors. Each night brought a small improvement. Each morning, the ice grew a little thicker, a little taller, a little wider. The wall began to take shape, not a crude structure, but a calculated creation, cold and entirely legal. To the neighbors, it looked like a strange weather event. To Karen, a growing inconvenience. But to Eli, it was a message, proof that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence, sub-zero air, and a bit of ingenuity. This was no longer about a shovel. This was a statement, and it was freezing into place, one thin layer at a time, right before the eyes of the woman who started it all. Every morning, Karen opened her door with a growing sense of unease. The ice wall had begun its quiet ascent along the property line between her house and Eli Turner's. No fanfare, no warning, just wind and bitter cold acting as silent accomplices. What started as a thin layer of frost on the fence, which she initially blamed on a faulty sprinkler system, refused to melt. Instead, it crept higher each night, spreading across bushes, lampposts, and even the iron gate behind her house, as if guided by some invisible hand, sculpting a frozen fortress. Karen measured the thickness with a wooden yardstick, scribbling notes onto her ever-present clipboard, her teeth clenched tight. She had once believed that everything in this neighborhood bowed to her will, from lawn height to trash bin placement to porch paint colors. But this wall didn't ask for permission, didn't fear warnings, and couldn't care less about the thick HOA rulebook she wielded like gospel. It was a symbol, an icy reminder that power isn't always permanent and not everything can be controlled. Eli said nothing. He didn't glance her way, didn't mock her online, didn't post a single word in the neighborhood Facebook group. He simply fine-tuned his system each night, adjusting spray angles, swapping nozzles, monitoring freeze cycles so the ice built steadily, not sloppily. And when temperatures hit their lowest point of the year, the neighbors started noticing. People slowed their steps to marvel at the wall, its glassy surface catching the amber hue of the streetlights like a giant mirror. Children began calling it the Ice Fortress. At first, adults shook their heads cautiously, but soon even they began to chuckle, especially when they saw Karen shoveling bags of industrial-strength salt around the base of the wall. The next morning, those very spots had frozen into jagged, lumpy crystals, backfiring entirely. She called the city. Officials arrived, examined the scene, and simply shrugged. "We can't stop the weather," they said. Eventually, the wall surpassed 6 feet, taller than a person, thick as solid stone. It didn't just obscure the view, it cut her off entirely, creating a physical divide between Karen and the rest of the world. A boundary not imposed by the HOA, but crafted by nature itself, under Eli's quiet direction. Every layer of ice was a silent warning, heavy with meaning. You can manipulate rules, but you can't manipulate winter. And Karen, clipboard in hand and wrapped in her festive coats, couldn't do a thing to melt the justice that was freezing solid just outside her door. Not long after the ice wall rose like a frozen monument between their two houses, Karen began to slip from the HOA throne she had occupied so firmly for years. Whispers among neighbors grew louder, no longer filled with nervous nods or forced flattery. Children dubbed her home the Ice Castle, while adults passed around the tale of the cursed shovel and Eli Turner's silent retaliation. Eli's quietness only added to the mystique. He didn't need to speak. The entire neighborhood heard him through every gleaming slab of ice. Accustomed to being feared and obeyed, Karen reacted the way those who fear losing power always do. She panicked. First, she installed 2 security cameras aimed directly at Eli's house, a passive-aggressive declaration that she was watching. Then came the industrial salt, dumped along the base of the wall in a desperate attempt to stop its spread. But the salt melted, then refroze into jagged, menacing shapes, making the wall resemble some medieval fortress rather than a mere winter oddity. The more she tried to regain control, the more dignity she lost. A teenager caught her on video screaming at the frozen gate, slipping on the icy walkway and falling hard. The clip, posted on TikTok, racked up hundreds of thousands of views overnight. The title, HOA Queen Gets Iced. In just a few hours, Karen went from feared enforcer to viral punchline. The spectacle reached the local news. A reporter showed up with a camera crew standing before the towering wall, asking residents about the strange winter phenomenon occurring in Seabreeze Hollow. Eli greeted the journalist with a warm cup of coffee and a vague remark. Nature has a way of balancing things out. He didn't confirm anything, but he didn't have to. The implication was enough. Karen refused to speak with the press. She shut her doors, drew her curtains, and remained holed up inside her house, surrounded by ice and whispers. HOA meetings became noticeably absent of her presence. Former allies began to distance themselves. Her authority melted faster than the spring thaw. She was no longer the arbiter of neighborhood order, just the subject of an ongoing joke that everyone told, but no one spoke with reverence. Karen's reputation, once built on intimidation and rigid control, collapsed under the weight of thick, silent ice. And Eli? He didn't need to say a word, because the wall outside had already spoken for him, loud and clear. As winter reached its harshest point, so too did the fall of Karen, the once feared HOA queen, now stripped of her invisible crown in the most spectacular and irreversible way. The ice wall had grown to nearly 10 feet tall, surrounding 3 sides of her house in thick frost, leaving only a narrow front entry. Even that was slowly being swallowed by a glacial arch Eli Turner had quietly engineered night after night. No one referred to her as President Karen with respect anymore. She had become the punchline of whispered porch conversations, the subject of countless internet memes, and the symbol of what happens when power loses the foundation of respect. One morning, Karen stepped outside to open her gate, only to find it frozen shut. The icy arch overhead had fused with the iron bars, creating what looked like a natural sculpture, massive and immovable. She tried everything: salt, boiling water, even a blow dryer hooked up with an extension cord from the house, but the bitter cold only made the surface slicker. By midday, she called the fire department. 2 uniformed men arrived, tapped the ice a few times, and shook their heads. "No immediate danger, ma'am. We can't intervene." But the final blow didn't come from the gate. It came from a video. A neighborhood teen had filmed Karen flailing against the wall of ice, shouting, slipping, and falling. The video, titled Frozen Queen Meltdown, went viral on TikTok within hours, catapulting Karen into internet infamy in the worst way. Local reporters showed up soon after, but she refused interviews. Meanwhile, Eli, ever composed, welcomed one of them with a warm cup of coffee and calmly remarked, "Winter's been unusually creative this year." The community began to move. A petition circulated to remove Karen from her HOA position. Within days, over 80% of residents had signed. No speeches were needed. Everyone remembered the ridiculous fines, the public scoldings over miscolored flower pots and untrimmed grass. Years of resentment finally broke free, released under the weight of the icy prison that now wrapped around her home. On the day of the vote at the community center, Karen didn't show. No defense, no parting words. The results were swift. She was officially removed from office. Her replacement, Susan Langford, a retired nurse with a kind smile and a philosophy that said, "A neighborhood should be run with compassion, not fear." Karen's exit was as quiet as her rise had been, but what she left behind wasn't a legacy of leadership. It was a bitter reminder that power cannot survive without kindness. And Eli, the man who never raised his voice, proved it not with fury, but with silence, and one unforgettable winter. After Karen left, the house that once served as the HOA's command center stood lonely, surrounded by soggy grass where the ice had only recently melted. The "for sale" sign leaned slightly, like a quiet punctuation mark at the end of a long, bitter sentence. But for Eli Turner, victory wasn't about Karen moving away or watching a tyrant fall. The real triumph, the one that stirred something deep in his chest, came when he stepped into his garage, looked up at the snow shovel hanging neatly on a wooden frame he'd built himself, and read the small plaque beneath it, "Return what isn't yours." That shovel, once just an ordinary tool, had become a symbol. Not because of its monetary worth, but because it marked the beginning of a series of events that reshaped the entire neighborhood. It served as a reminder that when something is taken from you, no matter how small, letting it go unchecked opens the door to far worse. And sometimes, justice doesn't require raised voices or clenched fists. It just needs quiet resolve and the patience to let wrongdoing melt under the weight of its own arrogance. Eli never admitted to being behind the ice wall, but the looks from his neighbors said they knew, and they didn't need a confession. They needed hope. Eli gave them that, not with speeches or angry confrontations, but with a frozen declaration that spoke louder than any words ever could. It was justice without a courtroom, punishment without police, and protest without sound. Change came slowly, but surely. Smiles became easier. Porch conversations lasted longer. The arrival of an HOA letter no longer triggered dread. One lazy Sunday afternoon, a spontaneous block party bloomed. Frank Whitaker, the longtime neighbor, brought hot cocoa and gifted Eli a ceramic mug with the words, "I survived the ice wall winter." Everyone laughed, but behind their laughter was something real: gratitude. New families who moved into Seabreeze Hollow would eventually hear the tale of that strange winter, the one where a man lost his shovel, built a fortress of ice, and in his silence awakened a neighborhood. The story was no longer rumor. It was legend. A cold reminder that those who seem untouchable are often undone by the simplest things: a patient man and a winter that knew how to speak. And each time Eli walked into his garage and glanced at that old shovel, he smiled. Not because he won, but because justice, at last, had been frozen, right where it belonged. Spring arrived early that year in Seabreeze Hollow. Trees began to bud, tender green grass crept across the lawns, and the snow melted into winding rivulets along the edges of the streets. But the echoes of that unusual winter still lingered, not just in the damp patches of earth, but in the way neighbors looked at one another and how they treated each other. No one spoke Karen's name with nervous respect anymore. Instead, there were soft chuckles when someone mentioned the ice castle or the video of Karen shouting at her frozen gate. The memory no longer felt bitter. It had become a strange kind of parable, told in winter's quiet voice. Eli Turner never bragged. He didn't post online. He didn't speak at the first HOA meeting under its new leadership. He simply stepped out onto his porch, coffee in hand, quietly observing a neighborhood that had once held its breath under the weight of arbitrary rules, now breathing easy again. His presence was no longer a silent shadow people avoided, but something respected. Children were free to chalk the sidewalks. Neighbors exchanged cookies instead of compliance notices. The snow shovel, the object that started it all, now hung in his garage, framed in a simple wooden mount, bearing the inscription, "Return what isn't yours." It wasn't a trophy. It was a gentle reminder. Doing the right thing doesn't require shouting to be heard. True justice, when pursued with quiet determination, can seep into every cold gust of wind, layer itself into every frost-covered surface, and leave behind a mark that can't be erased. Frank Whitaker, the neighbor who had watched everything unfold from just beyond the fence, occasionally walked the block with Eli in the evenings. They didn't speak much, but every time they passed Karen's old house, Frank would shake his head and smile. "Feels like something out of a fairy tale." Eli would simply smile back, neither confirming nor denying. He knew his greatest creation wasn't the wall of ice, but the realization it sparked, that this community didn't need a whip to stay on course. It needed kindness to keep from drifting. New families who moved in would eventually hear about the Frost Queen as a kind of local legend, tinged with humor, laced with meaning. And Eli didn't stop them. He let the story live its own life as a quiet warning. Never underestimate the patience of the kind, because when they stop being silent, their answer won't come in shouts. It will come in winter, layer by layer, drop by drop, freezing every wrong in place until justice thaws exactly where it belongs. The story of Eli Turner and the ice wall stands as a powerful testament to a simple yet profound truth. Justice doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, silence and patience are the strongest weapons of all. In a world where many choose to dominate, manipulate, or wield authority to control others, the real strength lies in not becoming like them. Rather than reacting impulsively or striking back in anger, Eli chose a smarter path, creative, lawful, and precise, to restore fairness and send an unmistakable message. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned and given in return. In everyday life, this lesson encourages us to manage our emotions, act with strategy, and uphold our values, even when facing injustice. Whether at work, within family, or in our communities, there will always be Karens, those who believe they can impose their will on others. But instead of meeting force with force, we can learn to observe, understand the rules of the game, and, when necessary, let our actions speak, quietly, yet with undeniable weight. Most importantly, this story reminds us that patience is not weakness, but the strength of wisdom. When you stand for what is right with unwavering integrity, justice will eventually rise, just as winter gives way to spring, whether through a single drop of water, a cold wind, or a silent look of gratitude from those you quietly helped along the way. If you felt a satisfying sense of justice watching the HOA Queen finally face the consequences of her actions, if you've ever been manipulated, overpowered, or simply longed to see justice served in a clever, cold, and calculated way, just like Eli Turner did, then go ahead and like this video as a round of applause for patience and creativity. And if you believe Karen isn't just one isolated case, but a reflection of many people out there, those who think they're untouchable, don't keep this story to yourself. Share this video with friends, family, co-workers. Let them be reminded that sometimes justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs to arrive at the perfect chill. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more real-life stories, gripping, thought-provoking, and full of heart. We're not just here to entertain. We're here to hold up a mirror to life, with a smile, a knowing nod, and every so often, a wall of ice thick enough to make the wrongdoers stop in their tracks.